Oh, clap once if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. We're going to be getting started really, really soon. In order for this live stream to look as amazing as possible, if you all wouldn't mind shifting up a little bit so that we can all be in community if you feel comfortable. Getting a little bit closer to the podium, we'd greatly appreciate that. And then Kathleen is going to get us started here very, very shortly, and we will start live streaming. So thank you all so much for being here.
Good evening. You hear me now? So welcome to Our Voice, Our Vote, Our Future panel discussion. I'm Kathleen Marker, CEO of YWCA Northeast Kansas, and I want to thank you all so much for being here this evening to learn about the complex issues of reproductive justice. It is our hope that you will leave tonight with a better understanding of reproductive justice and how you can take action in the days ahead and in the years to come. We recognize that for some, what you hear may be triggering. And at the back of the room at the YWCA table, Becca Smilman is there. She is an advocate. She's got her hand raised right now. She is happy to have conversation with anyone that feels that that's necessary. And also our hotline number for those that are listening to this and feel like they want to talk to an advocate is 888-822-2983. So before we get started, there are two important acknowledgments that I want to make. So as a step toward honoring the truth and achieving healing and reconciliation, YWCA Northeast Kansas commits to open all public events and gatherings, acknowledging that we are gathered on native lands of the Kickapoo, Kansa, and Shawnee peoples. I also want to thank our gracious host, St. David's Episcopal Church, and in particular, Ethel and Jim Edwards. So thank you. So YWCA's mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And I know a lot of you are probably tired of hearing me repeat that mission, but it is a part of what we do. It lives in the work that we do, in the advocacy that we do, and it's important that everyone understands this mission. So it does bear repeating, especially when our freedom and our dignity and our reproductive justice are all on the line. So we'll know we've achieved this mission when all women and girls, including individuals who are transgender, non-binary, are free from gender-based violence and exploitation. They're self-sufficient and paid a living wage, and able to thrive in their pursuits, able to access safe and affordable housing, receiving high quality and affordable health care, and fully represented in positions of leadership in their communities and in their workplaces. So for more than 50 years, YWCA Northeast Kansas has advocated for reproductive freedom of all people to make fundamental decisions about whether and when to have children. So in fact, YWCA USA led a coalition of partner organizations in submitting an amicus brief to the Supreme Court commenting on the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization and outlining our unwavering support for access to abortion care. So as the largest network of domestic violence service providers in the nation, we are locally serving over 3,000 survivors of domestic and sexual violence and human trafficking each year in Shawnee, Jackson, Brown, and Wabunsee counties. We recognize the deep connection between sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and abortion. Abortion bans and restrictive legislation are unnecessarily triggering for survivors who are already working to heal from attacks on bodily autonomy. So further restricting reproductive rights also puts more survivors in harm's way. And our advocates know all too well the already grim consequences that results in when an abuser or government is inflicting control. So should the amendment on August 2nd pass, this becomes a devastating possibility for survivors in Kansas. This amendment, should it pass, would be a direct assault on women and birthing people of color, people with disabilities, the LGBTQ community, and all folks who are already marginalized. Thanks to embedded racist and sexist legacies in the United States healthcare and other systems, these groups are already navigating and suffering the consequences of discriminatory systems. At a national level, we're at a crisis level for Black and American Indian Alaska Native maternal deaths, which are 3 to 4 times higher than for their white counterparts. And on a local level, our numbers aren't faring any better. Shawnee County's infant mortality rate is twice the national average. We do not need to be inflicting further control, further harm on our community's mothers and children by restricting their rights to choose if and when to have children. Make no mistake, this is not valuing them both. This is about valuing birth, no matter the devastating consequences. Our fight for reproductive justice rights is also a fight for economic and educational justice for women and girls, especially women and girls of color, because we know that lack of access to abortion has long-term negative consequences, impacting everything from educational achievement to financial security. Access to workplace accommodations like paid sick days and reliable scheduling are critical for those seeking abortion care. However, women of color disproportionately occupy jobs that offer neither, adding another layer of barriers. That's why beyond August 2nd, we must keep up the fight for fair workplace policies and practices, including a living wage, so that women across our community can continue to build their futures and their families on their terms. So our fight for reproductive rights is also a fight for disability rights, as people with disabilities are disproportionately paid lower wages and more likely to experience victimization than their non-disabled counterparts. Should the amendment on August 2nd pass, folks with disabilities will feel the devastating effects of the policy to come even more acutely. So today, I ask you to stand with me in telling our local, state, and federal officials that we know we deserve better and we demand better. We deserve leaders who trust women, who trust pregnant people, and to trust all that know that their right is their right over their own body and their lives. We deserve to live free from the threat of being criminalized for making decisions about our health, our lives, and our families. Bodily autonomy and the right to have an abortion are fundamental rights. Despite what the Supreme Court has ruled, and what's on the ballot August 2nd. So I now want to welcome the Reverend Canon Patrick Funston to the Ordinary of the Episcopal Diocese of Kansas to say a few words. Patrick?
Thank you. I'm Patrick Funston. I am canon to the Ordinary here in the Diocese of Kansas, which means that I'm the chief administrative counselor to our bishop. And on behalf of St. David's and of the Diocese of Kansas, I want to welcome you to St. David's. Just a bit of building orientation. The restrooms and in childcare is down that direction, down that door. And there are refreshments. Thank you for the refreshments, for bringing those in. St. David's is very happy to host this event, and we at the diocese are very proud of the people of St. David's for the ways that they support this community and the Westboro and surrounding areas with the meal program over the course of the summer, which is going to run through next Friday, I believe, daily meals for school-age kids. So we're very, very, very proud of St. David's. St. David's is one of 44 parishes in the Diocese of Kansas, which is the eastern one-third of the state of Kansas. And I'm here with you because our bishop, Kathleen Bascom, is unable to be with us today. She is in England getting ready for the decennial conference of all of the bishops of the whole Anglican Communion, the worldwide Anglican Communion. So she sends her greetings, and I'm here to bring you those greetings and that welcome as well. Our presiding bishop sent out a communique, a message to all of us following the Dobbs decision, and reminded us and reminded the world that the Episcopal Church has constantly been trying to carefully be responsive to both the moral value of people, including every person with a uterus, to be able to have their own individual rights to determine their healthcare choices, as well as the moral value of all life. And as Episcopalians, we really delight in holding space for conversation and questions, and are really glad to have you here and to invite you all into your own faith-filled discernment of complex and complicated issues. When it comes to abortion, as an institution, the Episcopal Church opposes any legislation which would abridge or deny the rights of individuals to reach informed decisions and to act upon them. However, in holding to those same individual rights, our clergy and lay leaders are generally non-directive on individual decision-making or individual voting. Still, I want to say that we are really appreciative of the YWCA of Northeast Kansas, the League of Women Voters of Topeka in Shawnee County, and the Women for Kansas in the Northeast, choosing to focus this evening on the issue of reproductive justice, moving the conversation from reproductive rights into reproductive justice. As followers of Christ and as students of the Old Testament prophets, we stand for justice, and we believe that justice includes equal access. And we appreciate that tonight we're going to be hearing from a group of panelists who are going to help inform us and educate us about the ways that access to reproductive care and healthcare more broadly is undermined by the evils of white supremacy and of racism. The sins, I would say, as an Episcopal clergy person, of white supremacy and racism. So tonight I pray that all of us will learn a little bit more, we'll listen a little bit more, we'll grow in our commitment to justice, and grow in our trust and respect for the ability of all people to exercise their own individual moral judgment.
Thank you, Patrick. We're grateful for St. David Episcopal Church for hosting our panel this evening. I quickly want to thank the Kansas League of Women Voters and Women for Kansas, Northeast Kansas chapter, for co-hosting this event. Special thanks to you, Kansas Women Attorneys for Freedom, for making tonight's event possible as well, and for YWCA USA for making tonight's live stream possible. I'd now like to welcome to the podium YWCA Advocacy Committee member and tonight's moderator, Katie Wade.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good evening. I'm Katie Wade. I'm the moderator for tonight's panel on reproductive justice. It's our voice, our vote, our future, and we have some amazing panelists here with us tonight to help inform, inspire, and empower us to get up and to do the work that we need to do to create a world where everyone has equal access to the health care they need and they deserve. Because language matters, I first want to offer some context for the reproductive justice framework we're going to be using tonight. We use those words a lot, but what do they really mean, and why does that particular language matter right now and in this moment? Reproductive health refers to public health, services, the expanding of access in this area. Reproductive rights covers the legal, political, and advocacy arenas. Reproductive justice is a framework rooted in the understanding of oppression and inequality. It examines power, autonomy, and self-determination and the intersections with our reproductive lives. Sister Song, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective in Atlanta puts it this way: reproductive justice is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have children, to not have children, and to parent the children that we have in safe and sustainable communities. The beauty of having this conversation here, hosted by the YWCA, is that we're able to use this lens to look at the amendment vote and examine the impact that it would have on our lives, on our neighbors' lives, and on our wider communities. So please join me in welcoming tonight's panelists. Teresa Woody. Teresa is the litigation director of Kansas Appleseed. Teresa has litigated the issue of reproductive rights for decades and has represented Drs. Hodes and Nasser as counsel. For more than a decade in Kansas, Teresa helped design the legal bypass procedures that allow minors a process to go before the court seeking an abortion if they fear asking for parental consent. Pierre DeRoy. Pierre uses she/they pronouns, is a Caribbean U.S. scholar. Pierre is a doctoral student in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program at the University of Kansas with a specialization in public policy, administration, and Caribbean studies. She holds an MA in Development Studies from York University in Canada, an MA in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies from the University of Kansas, a postgraduate diploma in international studies, and a BSS in sociology from the University of Guyana. She conducts research on human trafficking discourse, public policy interventions, immigrant livelihoods, and the global political economy, hate crimes and inequalities, gender and sexuality-based violence against women, LGBTQI human rights, and sexual reproductive health, rights, and justice, particularly for queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. She has over a decade of experience working with development-oriented organizations ranging from non-governmental, intergovernmental, and state agencies in areas of program management, community consultation, and resource mobilization, focused on education, mental and reproductive health, women's and youth's advocacy. Pierre's work constantly challenges and expands ideas of what freedom and control mean for individuals, particularly in their reproductive lives. Welcome here. Amy Hyten. Amy is the executive director of the Topeka Independent Living Resource Center, a human and civil rights organization with a mission to advocate for justice, equality, and essential services for a fully accessible and integrated society for all people with disabilities. Amy is an attorney licensed to practice in the state of Kansas and a grassroots advocate on justice issues, particularly as people are subjected to injustice through the denial of access and subjugation based on disability, race, gender, queerness, and poverty. Amy is a member of the sovereign, unceded Kingdom of Hawaii and a lifelong resident of Kansas, living on the territorial lands of the Kickapoo, Shawnee, and Kansa peoples. Welcome, Amy. Jerry Harvey. Jerry is currently an assistant professor of nursing, teaching nursing of childbearing families. Jerry has been an RN for 24 years, with all of her work experience being in obstetrics, specifically labor and delivery and high-risk obstetrics. She received her BSN in 1997 and MSN in 2019, both from Washburn University. Go Bots. Since 2018, Jerry has been involved in work to reduce poor pregnancy outcomes. Jerry currently serves on the Kansas Maternal Mortality Review Committee, the Kansas Perinatal Quality Collaborative, and is involved with March for Moms, an advocacy organization focused on decreasing the maternal mortality rate. Jerry is a lifelong Topecan and a wife and a mother of 3 girls. Welcome, Jerry. Sherry Camp. Sherry is a historian, a genealogist, earned her bachelor's and master's degree from Washburn University. Go Bob. Okay, there's a few of us, I'm excited. And a certificate in genealogy from BYU. She is president of the Kansas Network to Freedom and founding president of the Family Artifacts and Cultural Exchange. She is active with many community organizations. As the genealogy librarian at the Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library, she teaches workshops and classes locally and nationally. She is married with 4 children and 6 grandchildren. Welcome, Sherry. And Melissa Steeler, who we're matching tonight. Yes. Melissa is here representing the Vote Nay campaign. That's NEIGH, like the horse. A Western-themed Vote No campaign that has moved hundreds of young Kansans into action to defeat the constitutional amendment that would allow the legislature to enact a total ban on abortion. She is also the advocacy director for Loud Light and Loud Light Civic Action, where she helps build community power for Kansans statewide by providing leadership development and issue advocacy and education training, specializing in voting rights and government transparency. Melissa is a civil and workers' rights activist, and until November 2020 was the senior voting rights organizer for the ACLU of Kansas. While she is originally from Kansas City, she has led issue-based community organizing work with Planned Parenthood, the Cross-Border Network for Justice and Solidarity, and the AFL-CIO in more than a dozen states and 5 countries. If you'd like to follow her work, you can find her on Twitter at Melissa Steeler or by signing up to take action at Loud Light. Welcome, Melissa. Before we jump into our questions, we have a couple prepared for the evening. I want to put out another call. We have some note cards kind of floating around, and we really want this to be an audience kind of directed conversation, so I encourage you to put your questions on the note cards, and our volunteer Megan and Allison, I see a couple there, will be walking around and collecting those so that we can share them with our panelists. So get to thinking about what kind of questions you might have about the amendment. Questions to go ahead and start with. I think I'm going to ask each panelist to answer what brings you here tonight and why is this important. So would you like to go first? Yeah.
There we go. Hey, I am happy to be here, first of all, but I just want you to know that I am here representing my ancestors, those that were enslaved and had no ability to care for or be in charge of what happened to their bodies. I'm also here for my brothers and sisters who became free that still had no education and no way or no rights to take care of their bodies or to be in charge of their bodies. That's why I'm here.
Man, I have to follow that. It's so nice to be here with you all today. It's wonderful to see so many friendly faces, but also a lot of faces I've never seen before, which frankly is more exciting for me because new friends, right? I'm Melissa Styler. I use she, her pronouns, and it's pretty basic, I think, why we're all here. Bodily autonomy is a foundation for having actual and authentic liberation, and while we as a culture and as a society have never actually reached, true, meaningful, authentic liberation for all, we're not interested in going back. We've seen consistent attacks on our trans and non-binary family increasing more and more and more. That's moved along to additional parts of reproductive justice, but that also, this is a foundation for a lot of the freedoms that we currently have and a lot that we hope to gain in the future. And so if we're not fighting back now, then, what are we doing, right?
I am here tonight because in 24 years of taking care of patients having babies, I think of all of those moms that I've taken care of that, if we had this amendment passed, could have had terribly different outcomes than what they did. This amendment is going to affect everyone if it passes. It's not just moms, it's also their children, it's my nieces, my cousins, my friends. Everyone is affected by it. So it's important that we all clearly understand what may come of it and just know and support those around us.
This is Amy. My pronouns are static, and they are she, her, and hers. And I'm here because disabled people know that no matter what we call it, healthcare access, reproductive justice, reproductive rights, that fundamentally this issue is about control over our bodies. And disabled people have lived with a history of other folks controlling our bodies. And as our disabilities move down the spectrum, include intellectual and developmental disabilities, include mental health disabilities, and as our lives move down the spectrum of marginalization across race, gender identity, and poverty, that control becomes even more and more significant. Buck v. Bell was a decision made by the United States Supreme Court in 1927. It has never been overturned. And in Buck v. Bell, the United States Supreme Court held that people with disabilities could be involuntarily sterilized. People with disabilities in Kansas know that if this constitutional amendment passes, on August 3rd, disabled folks in Kansas will wake up in a state where we will not be able to control the destiny of our lives with respect to pregnancy, yet we still will not have the ability to stop the state's control of our bodies when it comes to involuntary sterilization.
Yep. I'm here today to really emphasize that there's never going to be peace without justice. And the reproductive rights around people's bodies or using the legal framework for freedom in some way is failing us. And it's failing us because it has ignored the inequalities that have existed for centuries transnationally and in the US. I'm a queer, I'm non-binary, and I know for sure that queer and trans BIPOC people are going to feel this regardless of the outcome, to be honest, because the insecurities have already peaked in particular ways. And there's going to be a lot of regressive or restricted ways. If there is amendment, there's going to be a lot of neglect. There's the possibilities of more underground abortions. There's going to be more abortion-related deaths. There's going to be more death by suicide, particularly for these populations that I've identified with. And I think I'm here today because it's just that, I'm constantly engaging with the topic, and it just seems not to go away, not to get easier. So with this conversation and being here is really for us to engage and pay more attention and try to shift the conversation and address the inequalities that tell some of us that we are incapable of making decisions for our own bodies.
I'm here because Kansans have the chance and the opportunity to show the nation that there is a different path forward than other than what we're seeing at the national level with respect to reproductive rights and so many other rights. Kansas is the first state that's going to be considering this question after the Dobbs decision. And if you look at the polling, you know there are more Kansans who support abortion, even with some forms of restrictions, than not. And so if those folks turn out, Kansans will stand and show the nation that the majority of folks really do care about rights, care about women's rights, about LGBTQIA rights, just about the rights of people of color and black people. This is a way for Kansans to show who we are, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your reasons. And I think that that's what we've seen just now is a real testament to the many different reasons that reproductive justice is so important. It touches every other social issue. It really intersects with everything. And so we've seen a lot of different reasons to show up and show out on August 2nd. And my follow-up to that is, why are you voting no on August 2nd?
I guess that starts with me again. I'm voting no, not because I believe in abortion or anything like that. I believe that everyone has rights. I believe that we were all given free agency. It's a God-given right that no one should be able to take away, and that we should be able to judge for ourselves what we need to do for ourselves. And if that's taken away, then I just feel like that's satanic, honestly. Each person has the ability to make decisions for themselves, and it's our job more to educate and help people make those decisions than to tell them they can't make a decision.
So more so than why I'm voting no, I would actually prefer to answer why I'm working so hard to have other people also vote no, right? So the first thing that not only the folks in this room should know, but the folks that will see the live stream should know is that abortion is still legal in Kansas. It is still protected by the Constitution regardless of anything else. But we still have an entire community of folks who do not know that this vote is happening and are undecided in that. They came out with the first public polling around the constitutional amendment, and it's very close, and it's going to be a very close vote. And even with that, they found that 14% of people didn't know that this was happening. They found that 10% of the people that did know that this was happening was undecided. And so what Vote Nay is doing is it's working, around the clock every day to reach as many Kansans as possible and to let them know what this vote actually means and that the election is even happening in the first place at all. And so every single day, right now, tomorrow, the next day, and every day between now and the election, there are volunteer shifts that you can do at home. You can phone bank from home, you can text bank from home, or the most effective thing that you can do is you can knock on doors. People in your neighborhood, they're with us. The grand majority of Kansans are with us. The grand majority of every faith tradition doesn't want a total abortion ban, including whenever the life of the pregnant person would be at risk for that, right? Nobody wants what this abortion or what this amendment would allow the Kansas legislature to do, but they put it on the August ballot because Senate President Ty Masterson and some members of the Kansas legislature don't trust voters. They don't trust voters to vote on their own rights, which is why they tricked us and why they're passing voter suppression bills. They do not trust us to make our own health care decisions, which is why they're trying to remove it from our Constitution. And frankly, we need to let voters know that we do trust them and that they have an opportunity here to protect all of our health care and our rights by voting no on August 2nd.
There's actually quite a few reasons that I'm voting no on the 2nd. And when we think of abortion and elective abortions, I firmly believe that regardless of how you feel about abortion, it's not my decision to make for somebody else. So that's right up there. Regardless of how I feel about it, you give information, you let her decide, and then you honor her choice. and support her with her choice. The ripple effect is what concerns me the most about having this amendment pass. It's not a black and white issue. And when we are looking at HB 2746, which was drafted this spring by our legislature, it shows us what they are planning to do, and it is a near total ban. So they're not hiding their cards at all. It's out there. And when you have a near total ban, it affects far more than the elective abortions that are a choice for the mom to make. It affects women during pregnancy who develop complications as well. It is a very far-reaching effect. So that is one of the most important reasons that I'm voting no, is because of that ripple effect. It even goes so far as into reproductive technology. It will forever change how we do in vitro fertilization, and it has major ramifications there as well.
From the disability perspective, we want to encourage people to vote no because folks need to understand that there will be additional, I think there's been kind of a discussion about sort of the downstream effect. Many people with disabilities rely on medications, and we are already seeing a retraction in the ability for people with disabilities to access vital medications to manage their health and disability, because those medications have secondary or primary and then have a secondary effect of helping address disability or health conditions. So we're already seeing people with disabilities who, under the Dobbs decision, are experiencing a disruption to their fundamental health care completely unrelated to reproductive health or reproductive justice issues. So we know, again, sort of that at the bottom of the barrel, at the bottom of the hill, are folks with disabilities, and are folks with disabilities who exist at the crossroads of marginalizations. We know that people, in particular, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, are subject to abuse at a very high rate, in particular sexual abuse. And this would mean that folks who may have had that experience, they may be bound to their abusers. Not just a matter of having a child, but I, across the years, have helped people who have literally had to continue to share custody with people who had sexually assaulted them. And so having the barriers for people with disabilities, the barriers for people with multiple marginalizations are greater and greater. Lack of transportation, lack of ability to access healthcare choices, need for actual physical assistance means that just going to another state isn't really an option. There, and again, ultimately, the goal being a continued and an expanded control over our health, over our bodies, and over our well-being is not the direction that the state should be going, in particular for people with disabilities.
And I'm voting no because I'm representing myself in some way. I want you to stay off my body. I want my freedom, and I don't want to tell anyone else what to do with their body. I don't want to contribute to the criminalization of anyone for making a decision in their own life. I don't want to basically contribute to how people become marginalized. In addition to that, I follow on your point on assisted reproductive technology, where IVF and artificial insemination is where persons get help to conceive and to be able to parent, to have the choice to conceive and to parent. And if there's an amendment, the embryos will be seen as having personhood. Now, the embryos, for some persons who might not know, when there is and you can correct me on this one, right? When it's implanted and changes happen and they're split and there are many embryos in there now, sometimes, and it's unsafe to have so many existing at the same time. So abortion is illegal. What's going to happen there? And so my no is to put that in focus.
to say, what are you trying to say? This the life that's carrying the embryos, no matter? So that is why I'm voting no.
So I'm encouraging everybody to vote no because I've been involved in litigating reproductive rights in Kansas for over a decade. And I know what's going to happen if this amendment passes. Kansans are right now only able to have a choice to have an abortion because of the litigation that has kept it at bay, and the Supreme Court's decision to say that within the Kansas Constitution, the state constitution, is a fundamental right to abortion. That does not mean, as the other side would like to say, that abortion will be unregulated. Even with the Supreme Court case saying that abortion is a fundamental right, regulations are still possible. In fact, right now, there are over 20 some odd regulations on the books of abortion. Some of them reasonable, many of them ridiculous, but they're there. And if the amendment passes, you can bet that by next session there will be a virtual total ban, maybe, where it would be available if the life of the mother was at stake. But it won't be for rape, won't be for incest. We've already seen the drafts of the legislation. We know where it's going. And I will tell you, in states that already have this ban, where it went into effect immediately, like neighboring Missouri, it's already had an effect. I know personally of a young woman, 22-year-old nursing student, who had an ectopic pregnancy. And if most of you understand what that is, that's where the fertilized egg doesn't implant in the uterus, it gets implanted in the fallopian tube instead. It can be fatal. It's very, very dangerous. She waited over 6 hours to have a procedure to save her life because the hospital was running around trying to get legal counsel's opinion as to whether that would run afoul of the abortion ban, and only was able to access that procedure because the doctor finally said, "I don't care. This has to happen." We don't want that in Kansas. We don't want those kinds of terrible choices being made by people who, by legislators. We want to have that choice ourselves. One of the Kansas legislators this session actually thought that if somebody had an ectopic pregnancy, it should be removed from the fallopian tube and implanted in the womb, which is impossible. It's scientifically, medically impossible. But those are the folks who are going to be making the decisions for everybody in Kansas if this amendment passes. And that's why I'm encouraging everybody to vote no.
Thank you, panelists. I want to make sure that I remind folks, too, if you have audience questions, please share those with Megan so that we can... Do we have some, Megan? Great. Okay. Okay. First, I want to maybe ask, we've already been touching a little bit on the ripple effects that we expect to be kind of ongoing if this amendment should pass. We're already seeing ripple effects in other states where there were trigger laws in place or there were pre-Roe bans in place that took effect again. So I wanted to start with maybe our disability rights advocate with our nurse to talk about those particular ripple effects on health and people's bodily autonomy. And then I'm going to read through some of these questions too for our next question. But would you like to go first? Sure.
So the ripple effects, I mentioned that is going to affect far beyond elective abortions. Currently, if someone presents with an ectopic pregnancy, a diagnosed ectopic, we know that it is not viable. That is not a pregnancy that's going to be able to continue. And if it does continue, it can become life-threatening to the mom. Currently, we can go ahead and treat and terminate that pregnancy. That usually keeps the mom from having her fallopian tube rupture and losing that fallopian tube. So one of the risks with ectopics, besides the fact that you may have it rupture and have internal bleeding. It also leads to infertility sometimes. If you lose a fallopian tube, that means you're down to one. And if you have 2 ectopic pregnancies and they rupture, then you have no more fallopian tubes. So that's something that if we have a ban, a patient, when she's diagnosed, is not going to be able to go ahead and terminate that pregnancy. They have to wait until they start having signs of internal bleeding. They are waiting until the mom is starting to deteriorate. Pregnancy complications can develop very early on in pregnancy sometimes. And recently, my family did have an experience with one of my nieces. She developed several life-threatening complications at 22 weeks. 22 weeks is not viable. So when I talk about a viable pregnancy, I mean if the baby is born, the baby will survive or has a very good chance of surviving. At 22 weeks, that is not a viable baby. In her case, it was pre-Roe being overturned. They were able to deliver her and save her. She had preeclampsia with HELP syndrome and DIC. Let me tell you, all 3 are bad. Any of those 3 can be fatal. So she was able to get care that she needed to keep her alive. The way it sits now in Missouri, and she lives in Missouri, the way it sits now is if she presented today with the same scenario, there would have to be consultations. And I firmly believe that if she would have had to wait for a consultation with risk management, she would not have survived. So those are the big ripple effects that go far beyond an elective abortion. It affects people who are pregnant and wanting to have a pregnancy outcome. I mean, it's very far-reaching.
Thank you, Sherry. Amy, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the things that I said sort of the last time, I mean, there's other existing healthcare access issues that will be affected for people with disabilities. There is, sort of the larger social determinants, who you end up having to live with or in proximity for the rest of your life. But I think that it's important, in terms of, it's important to remember that, I sort of said it, I sort of glossed over it. Buck v. Bell is the law. Buck v. Bell has never been overturned. And in the state of Kansas, as recent as the 1970s, that's post-Roe, people with disabilities were being involuntarily sterilized. The United States Supreme Court, in the Dobbs decision, Justice Kavanaugh actually had a history as an appellate court judge in a case of Doe v. D.C., where he actually penned the decision that said that women with disabilities in the DC jurisdiction could be forced to have abortions, okay? So this isn't about, stopping access to abortion. This isn't about stopping or valuing, the lives of folks. Because Kavanaugh himself, one of the authors of the Dobbs decision, himself has a record of saying that people with disabilities can be treated so cavalierly that, as the United States Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes basically said, if we can make people get vaccinations, it's okay to cut fallopian tubes. And in Kansas, we've continued post-Roe to cut fallopian tubes. We've actually continued also to cut more than fallopian tubes. Vas, Darren's, sort of everything. Anybody could be subjected. This isn't just a women's issue. Anybody in Kansas could be subject to sterilization.
And one other big ripple effect is that it's going to have a very inequitable effect, and will affect more people who of lower income, people who don't have the opportunity to go to another state, for instance, or even another country if they needed to get an abortion. We already have a terrible inequity in maternal deaths in communities that don't have as much access to health care. That's going to be even worse. The people who say they value life so much, you don't see them stepping up to provide child care, to provide medical care, to even, in fact, make sure that that no child in Kansas goes hungry. So you can see the ripple effects that this is going to have as it flows downstream, particularly to people who just don't have the resources to have any options.
Katie, do you mind if I follow up on that too?
Sure, yeah,
Great.
go ahead.
Yeah, so I just really wanted to back up what everybody was saying here with a few examples that are happening right now. I mean, my best friend is a mother of two. She has an autoimmune disease in which she's had, a dozen surgeries on. It took more like almost a decade to figure out what kind of medication cocktail would allow her to live a healthy life. One of the medications that allows her to live a healthy life now is a low-dose chemotherapy that could cause a miscarriage. And she lives in Missouri, so she's talking with her doctors now if she is able to get her life-saving medication, even though she's already a mother. She doesn't want to have kids anymore. But because she's reproductive aged, even if she's on birth control, even if her husband gets a vasectomy, it doesn't matter. They're arguing over if she can get her life-saving medication or not. My mother faced serious life-threatening consequences with all of her children. And every time she got pregnant, she knew that it was very possible that she would have to have an abortion to save her life. Now I'm at the age where I'm having to make my own family planning decisions. Do I want to take that risk of maybe having a child if it's going to cause me to die? I don't think that I do. And beyond just the medical ripple effects, we have to mention that Justice Thomas said that he had full intention of overturning settled case law that was based upon Roe, that allows LGBTQ people to have relationships with one another, gay marriage, and even Griswold, which allows birth control, he said wasn't settled law, right? And so as far as our reproductive health care, this goes far beyond just abortion. We know that the Supreme Court has been chipping away at our rights for many, many years. And so we in Kansas have the opportunity. We are the first state who's going to be able to fight back and protect some basic liberties, some basic individual liberties for our bodies, ourselves, our love, our relationships, our families. And so we have to do everything that we can to encourage as many people to vote no as possible.
Thanks, Melissa. Pierre, I have a question from the audience for you that ties right into this conversation that we're already having, so I think it's a great
I also have a...
Yeah, you can go ahead and piggyback, and then I will...
Okay,
ask
you go with the question, and then we can circle back, maybe, if it's not touched on.
Go ahead.
It's just in terms of the ripple effect, like, we're not starting from zero. We're not starting from a place of saying, hey, things were this way before, and now there's amendment, and things have now gone way down. For some people, for black populations in the U.S., for people of color, they've been mistreated, they've been ignored, they've been they're forced sterilization, they've been unpaid in ways they can't sustain themselves. There's ableism in policies, white supremacist ideas on creating policies. The same reproductive abortion policies that exist and the services, it was created in a system that made those who were afraid of being vulnerable in the first place. So I just want to establish that we're not starting from zero. And, I'm still I hear about the ripple effect. I do. My major fear in terms of the ripple effect is that the people who are doing the work will have to do heavier fetching. The people who've been outside of the political system, who've been providing, say, hey, fund, excuse me, can you send some money because we got some people here right now, even in terms of persons, I don't know if I have the right language, in terms of disabilities, invisible disabilities, physical disabilities. Hey, can you help us? Because you know what? Right now they think such population don't have sexuality. So there's a total ignoring. So I just want to establish that it's the fear that's and the heavier lifting that people of color, that black populations, and basically I noticed that activists, even Sister Song, the people who are pushing for reproductive justice, they will have to advocate and try and raise money and dance to different music with this amendment. Right, like, it's just not there. It's basically what the amendment signifies for who was already or were in vulnerable positions. That's just what I want to throw there. Thank you. Did
I answer that question there? No, this is an interesting question. Sorry, you get back to you. So we have an audience question for Pierre. What do you think a vote yes would mean to Black women as it relates to health care across Kansas?
Okay, no, I done video, so I have to be careful. You know, there's no song by grabbing here. So, a preamble to this. So my work, I focus on the US and I also focus on the English-speaking Caribbean. I focus on how policies created in the US around reproductive health goes through international organizations and impact international politics around abortion, around reproductive health services, right? So my answer to this now is that there has always been a mistrust. So to be honest, you never even speaking to me with this amendment. You were speaking to me because you've never been speaking to me. You haven't been speaking to me in the past. So let me tell you what's going to happen is going back to the heavier burden lifting, is that there's going to be more transnational organizations like NGOs will probably step in. There's going to be holding certain feminist politics. People will start moving across borders internationally, regionally to help out. Practitioners are going to be at risk of losing their license because now they'll have to go a bit further. So in terms of answering that question, I just want to say this amendment is like, I don't know if it actually is going to make a big difference. If it goes ahead with a continued no, that means that you are looking at us. That's what it will represent. The yes and the amendment change would be like, oh, well, we know you didn't care, so let me go back and see who I got in this underground economy to make things happen. You know, so I'm not trying to be cynical. Because, you know, there is hope. There's a reason why people really look to the legal system. You know, this way of establishing standards. But I really want to know. I really want to know to happen, to occur, because it will signify hope. So I don't know how to go in the yes direction. I'm trying not to take my mind there, but I know that we're not going to feel like, you know. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that one, though.
Katie.
I appreciate noting on the end of hope. And yeah, Sherry, I was especially interested in your perspective in this question as well as a historian and a genealogist, especially when we talk about historical trauma and how Black and Indigenous voices in particular have not been listened to on this issue for decades.
That's exactly where I want to go. Dr. DeGrew talks about post-slavery, let's see, what is it? PTSS, post-traumatic slavery syndrome, whereby people, you know, there's already been a study where mice are allergic or don't like peppermint because their ancestors didn't like peppermint, right? So this is already a proven fact that trauma translates over generation after generation. So if I, who am a descendant of a traumatized woman who has been enslaved, then has children, and they are traumatized as well as I, and then their children are traumatized, and so on and so on. There's no, well, I'm not going to say no, because I believe in hope. I believe there's always a chance, as we've heard, but I believe that trauma continues, and trauma turns into mental illness, it turns into all kinds of other things that are not solved because it's invisible. But we do need to address the fact that the distrust that you mentioned, those things continue on and on for generations, and those are the things that we are trying to address even today with just education and learning. So for instance, in my own personal family, I have generations of women who have been traumatized in many different ways, and it literally translates from generation to generation. And that's one of the things I've learned in genealogy. If you're doing your research and you're trying to find someone who you don't know where they are or something like that, you can look at different family members and see how their circumstances continue on to the next generation, and it helps you literally to find family. I've found family in that way, so I can recognize this family trait and it will continue on. So these are things that we want to try to eradicate in so many different areas of our society, you know, sociology and psychology as well, social work and so on. And so if we are not, or if we're continuing on the trauma, let's just put it in that term, then we're really making prisoners of our following generations.
Thank you both. Do you want to add on to it? Go ahead.
Sorry. To build on that, it's along with anti-abortion policies is also abortion stigma. So if we go back to the idea of what reproductive justice is and what it seeks to do in terms of, one, the right to not become pregnant, right, choose not to be a parent, to using contraceptives, abstinence, and abortion. And these contraceptives are not like, you know, they're not like 100% like, yeah. So pregnancy happens, and persons, I don't want to become a parent, but the stigma, because the policies exist, have influence and carry narratives that we have to be pregnant. It's attached to our personhood. It validates us, and it has this bigger goal of like multiply the nation, and it goes on and on. But in that same argument, the stigma is going to make someone keep the embryo to fetus to child, and guess what? They're living in a tenement yard. They have no job. They're sick. They're basically afraid that their child's going to be shot down. They themselves feel like, oh my goodness, excuse my language here, they don't have a pot to piss in. So the stigma made them carry that pregnancy through, and they try to convince themselves that they're going to be a good parent, when really you need some therapy. You need some healing, and this is part of what the ripple effect of what, especially for black populations. That's what they carry, this fear, and then, you know, it's like they themselves, they get so sick. So I just want to stop that, yeah.
Thank Pierre and Sherry for contextualizing that part of this conversation. The next question that we have from the audience, I think I would like for Teresa to start us off, and then, of course, everyone can feel free to add in. Teresa, how will the passing of this amendment and future legislation affect medical privacy in Kansas?
Well, we don't really know, but we know that if abortions become criminalized, then you have a situation where you might have the situation in Texas where your neighbor can tell somebody that you're pregnant, and you can then be prosecuted, and your doctor can be prosecuted. You can go to jail. So, I mean, there will be definitely an impact on privacy. I mean, there was a cartoon that I saw, and it showed a couple in a vehicle, and they were stopped, and somebody looked like a county sheriff with a big hat is walking up toward him, and the woman turns toward the man. There happens to be a big rifle, up above the window, and she turns to him and says, "Don't worry, I've got the contraceptives in the gun." So I mean, there is this fear that people will be watching you, and that that, there will even be technology that looks to see if women are menstruating or not, and tries to understand if they're pregnant. So, it's very uncertain, but it's, you look at what happened back when Phil Klein was the Attorney General in Kansas, and the infringement on women's medical privacy then. So it's definitely something that could happen.
Privacy is a privilege. I mean, to sort of what Pierre was saying earlier, is the reality is that privacy is a privilege. And, folks who have that privilege stand to lose that privilege. And the reality is that, that marginalized folks, the folks with disabilities, that we haven't had that privacy in the first instance. And so, but every right that's articulated in the Bill of Rights, the right to not self-criminalize, the freedom of association, all of those rights hinge on our privacy, on our ability to control information about ourselves and the information and the decisions and the choices that we make for our bodies.
Thank you, panelists. My next question comes from a couple of different questions that we got from the audience that are particularly about men. What can we be expecting of men relative to reproductive rights into this conversation? How can we engage them further? And how do we expect them to join in this fight? And how can we reach out to them in a better way? How can we show them that they are a part of this work too? And that question's for any panelist who feels ready to take that on.
I mean, I'm Catholic, but I don't think that we have any Virgin Marys anymore, right? Like, men are a part of this process. And, I mean, have a basic ethical responsibility to fight for liberation of those who can become pregnant, right? That they could get pregnant, right? The thing is we've talked about the ripple effects. We've talked about Roe wasn't actually a case about abortion. It was a case about privacy, right? And so all of our liberation is wound up in each other. And I don't know how to say it more clearly than that. If they don't see the kind of that we're not all islands and that we're all interconnected and that our rights depend on each other and our health care depends on each other and our liberation depends on each other, then they're probably just a jerk and you should maybe take some space, right? If that's not going to convince them, then I don't know what would.
Well, and there's another part to that too. I mean, abortion is not just, doesn't have just an impact on a woman. Married people decide to have abortions. Couples decide to have abortions. In fact, in the Roe case, the plaintiff was pregnant with her third child, and she and her partner had decided that they couldn't take care of anymore. They were incapable. They were at their end of their ability to care for children. So it's a family decision, and it does affect men. And the inability to make that decision for your own family, that definitely is going to have an impact on men.
My thought is fathers, brothers, family members should be caring about the women in their lives and concerned about their happiness, their well-being, and their emotional well-being specifically. And so this is something that all men should think about because they have women in their lives. They have family members that they should be concerned about what happens to them and what happens to them is specifically when it comes to unwanted pregnancy.
That sounds great. I think that was really helpful. The next question that I have kind of ties into that as well. How can we appeal to the folks who are still on the fence with their vote? What can you say to them to move them to a no vote? And kind of additional to that, what talking points have you guys found successful in talking to folks who appear to be on the fence?
I think there's some power in inertia. I mean, right? And the reality is a no vote changes nothing. right? Not for the better, not for the worse. A no vote changes nothing. You know, so if you're somebody, you know, if it's somebody who has questions, well, what about this? What, you know, well, all of those, you know, and again, I think Teresa made the point. Restrictions are, you know, this isn't, you know, sort of the Hyde Amendment, open season, everybody, you know, abortion for you. It's not like that. You know, there are already significant restrictions here in Kansas, and, you know, and limitations and health considerations and safety standards and things like that. A no vote, it changes nothing. And that, I mean, and there's some power in that, right?
And I think you really do, you know, it is a matter of self-autonomy. It is a matter of governmental interference. As we discussed, you know, do you really want the Kansas legislature making your medical decisions? Or should that be a decision that you make in consultation with your medical caregivers? Because if the amendment passes, they're going to have that power to make those decisions for you. And I don't think they'll stop there. I mean, I think if the amendment passes and they ban abortion, they have an agenda far beyond that they'll be pursuing that will impact all kinds of rights.
I want to add to that. So let's talk about the advertisements that we see on television that say that your vote yes means that your legislature will be, your elected official will be able to make the decision for you, basically is what I hear. And I'm like, so if the elected officials are all, let's say because the lines are drawn and everything's kind of rigged, and let's just say that the wrong official that I'm against is the one who's voted in, has the ability to vote for me and is now my voice, that's not my voice. And so voting yes is really, for me, would be voting for someone to have my voice that doesn't believe the way I do.
Yeah, if I could just follow up on exactly that. Let's look just a little bit to how we even got here, right? So in 2019, the Kansas Supreme Court found that bodily autonomy, including abortion, was a constitutional right. They found that, largely thanks to folks like Teresa over there, because there were lawsuits against really extremist anti-choice legislation that was passed under the Brownback administration. Immediately after that, under Susan Wagle and Kansans for Life attempted to pass this exact same amendment in 2020. They held up Medicaid expansion because they couldn't get it done. You had completely anti-choice Republican legislators who were like, you know, I would love to ban abortion as much as the next guy, right? But I'm not going to pass, or I'm not going to vote for this specific amendment because it's not fair how we're doing this. It's not during a regular election. It's, you know, this isn't the will of the people. This isn't meaningful, authentic democracy. We don't, you know, we shouldn't rig this thing. And what happened is Kansans for Life primaried those guys. And then the next legislative session under Ty Masterson, they did it all over again, right? And after they had primaried out the already very far right, very anti-choice, very extreme Republicans with even more Republicans, as soon as they passed that, right, which of course they needed, it was vetoed and they needed a two-thirds majority and all that, but as soon as they passed that, immediately Kansans for Life started rallying folks for voter suppression bills. Immediately. It's still on their website right now. Right now it is on their website that the things like, you know, not being able to help as many people as we used to drop off their advanced mail ballots and, you know, just helping people with advanced voting applications and things like voter registration, right? Like lots of different things were passed immediately, and they were championed by Kansans for Life, which again, like Republicans call bullies too, because they essentially have unlimited money because Kansas is such a dark money state. To, if anybody steps out of line, they can, Republican or Democrat, they can just pour buckets and buckets of money into their campaign. And so it's not like we got here and we're voting on this because Kansas has been what, you know, our opposition would say this safe haven for abortions or whatever, right? That's very much so not the case. They're spending millions of dollars to lie to voters, to make it harder for people to vote. In an August primary election, which of course they can't put the amendment on the primary election ballot, it's a special election, most Democrats don't vote in primaries because there's not that much competition, and unaffiliated voters never vote in primaries. And so they're trying to tip the scale. This isn't about democracy. This is about power. This is about control.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, can I?
Sure.
I was just like thinking here on what's some talking points. It's like, since the overturn, but like since persons got wind of what's happening, the conversations I've had to have. So my first success is really starting where we're at. Where are we? And I had to get real. I'm like, let's talk to me. So 2 examples. 1, person started coming to me, a black person, coming to me, like, Pierre, like, this abortion thing, not knowing that this is exactly what I do, right? So, but I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to help you get there. So we're going to start from this. So I'm like, so tell me something. You ever had an abortion? You know anyone that ever had an abortion? Why? Well, they couldn't afford it. It's like they had this house. I'm like, so talk to me. You think so we're starting from your experience, your lived experience of having abortions, knowing people who've had abortion, and had to do it for these various reasons. Shouldn't we really consider those reasons? So, and then that was my entry point into going elsewhere. I'm like, so there's this one case of like this same one person telling me about genocide. I'm like, what would have changed your situation? Why you would have like kept and become a parent? Well, the man was abusive. She had the right job, was living home. So she started, like, we go back to reproductive justice and all these conditions that made her decide that she had to take an abortion because she wasn't choosing or wasn't capable of parenting under the conditions that she wanted to parent. The second part goes back to men, cisgender men, heterosexual men. I'm like, let me talk. They're talking about women. I said, tell me something. And this goes back to abortion stigma. If you had a one-night stand with people, this is like real conversations, right? You had a one night, things happen, things pop off, it don't work out. Person calls you a month after saying, hey, I'm pregnant and I'm having it, and you are going to be the father. He did not consent to that. So when we look at lots of cases and examine the ways in which, what do you call it? The thing with child support. A lot of men, like taking in their experiences, did not consent to this as well. There was not consent. So it's all these different persons who are part. But he decides to parent because of these ideas around gender. You are not a man. And I ain't gonna be a single parent, so you better show up. So talking to men, that was another talking point, like asking, like, hey, you gotta vote no, because you are gonna be tied to this conversation. You're gonna have to fork out money for 18 years. So what are we doing? So that's my talking points, like success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any way that we can engage that it is it takes two to tango, and so that conversation has to happen. Jerry, I have one question from the audience for you, and then I have another question that I'm going to use to kind of wrap up our conversation today by getting some feedback from the whole panel. Jerry, your question is, how do you think this bill could affect keeping and educating doctors and nurses in the state of Kansas?
It puts them in a very tough spot. So I talked a little bit ago about treating a pregnant woman with a life-threatening condition. If the amendment passes and we have the bill go through that we have seen, then your doctor is going to be looking at you differently as a pregnant woman that is not viable yet. So my niece that was 22 weeks, for example. Instead of acting quickly and doing the evidence-based practice that we do, that we know saves lives, they're going to sit there and say, is she sick enough yet? She's pregnant. We have to wait and weigh things out. And that right there sets things up for poor outcomes. We are going to see more mortalities. I sit on this Kansas Maternal Mortality Review Committee. We will see more cases because of that kind of situation. Another thing is morbidities. That's another big word that people don't really understand what that means. But mortality is obviously death. Morbidity is you have significant damage to some part of you. So someone that ends up in ICU after a delivery, that's a morbidity. They're very sick. When we are approaching patients with the thought of, I can only intervene if it gets to this point, you're treating that patient unequally to others. She is being treated differently because she has a baby. And that puts physicians and nurses in a terrible spot. You know what you should do, you know what's right to do, but you do have this fear of, am I going to get criminally punished for doing this, which is the right thing to do for her.
Thank you, Jerry. We got a lot of questions from the audience about what comes next. So the question that I kind of want to use to wrap up our conversation today is what we envision beyond August 2nd. So on August 3rd, however this turns out, what do we do first? And I think I want to ask that of each of you. What do you wake up and you do first? Where do we go from here?
Well, I would hope that it wouldn't start on the 3rd, but as a committee precinct person, my thought would be to continually talk to my neighbors. The conversation needs to continue, not just on this issue, but all voting rights issues across the board, because we need to educate ourselves, we need to be involved in the process, we need to vote, we need to vote, we need to vote, and we need to continue being a part of a community where we communicate about what's important to us.
I have no idea what I'm going to do August 3rd, but I know what I'm going to do every single day between now and August 2nd. I know I am going to do every single thing in my power to reach as many Kansans as possible and inform them that this vote is happening. Because the thing is I realized actually that I didn't answer this question earlier. We don't need to convince people to share our views, because the grand majority of people are already with us. We need to turn people out. We don't need to convince them. We need to educate them about what this bill would do, what this amendment would do, what rights would be taken away from us. Why it's not, I work with young people, right? I fancy myself rather young myself. I know that it's really easy to be disillusioned with politics and to think that it's just all so corrupt and rigged. But this isn't voting for, a representative that you hope will share your interests. This is voting on your constitutional right directly. This is a winner-take-all election. It is a numbers game. And the system is rigged. It's specifically set up so that way an unpopular opinion can be forced upon the majority. What we need to do is we need to take action every single day that you talked to as many Kansans as possible about this, by knocking doors, by phone banking, by text banking, to let them know that this vote is even happening and what it would mean if we lose. If you'd like to sign up to take action with me, so that way on August 3rd, no matter how things turn out, you did everything that you can sign up at, and this is the exact same calendar of events that literally every single person is sharing. It's all the same thing, but I think it's easy to remember. ksvotenay.com/events. It's a little easier than various bit.ly links that are going around. But every single day, there's an opportunity for you to talk to people who already agree with us and don't know that the vote is happening. We need 300 volunteer shifts every day between now and the election in order to talk to as many people as we need to. And so make that pledge to yourself and ask people to do it with you. ksvotenay.com. Or, of course, we're members of and kind of the youth arm of Kansans for Constitutional Freedom. The exact same calendar is on their website, too. You can come and hang out with us. Actually, on the 30th, we have a Get Out the Vote rally at the State House at 3 o'clock. Ponies to the polls. It's going to be real cute. We have a Pony Express to go vote early and a whole little thing. And so, I mean, take action like the young women who are planning this incredible rally on the 30th who've joined forces with us. Talk to people and let them know this is happening. It's wonderful that you're here today. It's better to go talk to people tomorrow.
The question was, what will we do on the 3rd?
Yeah.
And that's all awesome. I was very, very listening to that.
It's
Okay.
almost like I do this for a living.
It is almost. I am very impressed. But August 3rd, if we wake up and this amendment has passed, then I've already been thinking about what am I going to do. And regroup is one of them. One thing, you're going to regroup, you're going to get your like minds together and start planning and start coming up with strategies to change it the way we want to see it changed. And we're not going to wait. It'll be the next day.
Again, it's a point that I think I've made earlier. Pierre's made it, other folks have made it. You know, for disabled folks in Kansas, not a lot changes either way. Just like it didn't change with Roe, and it didn't really change except for maybe for a little bit for the worse under Dobbs. So, I mean, I think really ultimately what we have to do is we do need to get up ready to have a conversation about what are the values? Who are we valuing? How uneven and inequitable is the value system that we have in this state? And what kind of work are we going to do to sort of to level the playing field, to bring people up, to move things forward, to address a history of trauma for everybody, and to demonstrate that we really do value the people who we live around, the people that we surround ourselves with, our families, our loved ones, strangers. And how are we going to have the people who have made this commitment to valuing lives, how are we going to make them demonstrate that commitment in very real and concrete terms? Are we going to see Medicaid expansion? Are we going to see housing? Are we going to see accessible transportation? Are we going to see access to food, dental care, all of the things that people need now, that we've needed for years, and that we'll continue to need in the future?
Yeah, I support that. And, you know, for me, it's about continuing consciousness raising around reproductive justice and, you know, the values that we hold that allow this to reoccur or occur in this way. So, point of action, if you're looking for some organizations, Sister Song, like Spark Now, like these are organizations that's national, just follow them, see where they're connecting. There's organized queer and trans organizations for youth. Get connected because they need that information and they need that support, and they are very much shaken up right now. So consciousness raising is exactly what I'm going to do and encourage.
Well, unfortunately, if the amendment passes, I know what I'm going to be doing on the 3rd, because there isn't a trigger law in Kansas, and there will be massive litigation all over the place about all kinds of different issues that are not going to be resolved just by this amendment. But I'll keep doing what I've always done, and I'll keep encouraging young people to keep doing that. I think it's really, really important that we understand how many young people feel so strongly about this. 70% of the young people in the country did not want Roe overturned and want the access to abortion and to make their own decisions. And, you know, it's really, really important that we think about that when we're in the next few days before the vote.
Thank you, panelists. I mean, if if Pierre can co-sign, then I kind of want to co-sign what people said too, because I think that really sums it up. We know that the vote on August 2nd is not the beginning or the end of this conversation, but it is like a crucial turning point, right? So that's why it's so critical for us to have these conversations and to really know how we go forward from here and talk to our friends and our neighbors about voting no. I want to can we get another round of applause for our panelists, because that was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. We had a lot of audience questions that were a lot of specific audience questions that were about some really nuanced topics. I think that is great. Let's continue this conversation. Like, let's not let this be the end of that. So yeah, are there any other logistical things for tonight? Okay, we want to thank you guys so much for coming out, for participating. I see Allison is like waving at me. Okay. Well, it looks like Allison has a few logistical things she wants to share with us.